All right, let's get to the main topic of today. How many people like freedom of speech? Okay, that's an easy one, right? Everybody raised their hand, by the way, for the audience watching on video. How about unrestricted speech? Completely unrestricted. Everything goes. You can say anything. Nothing can be restrained by government a priori. Who wants to go for that one? Excellent. Slightly smaller group, but still majority of the people in this room. All right. How many people here believe that the same should apply to money, financial transactions? Slightly smaller group yet, but still a substantial proportion of the people in this room. If I ask this question, in most places in the world, people draw a very hard distinction between their appreciation of freedom of speech and applying that same idea to money, to commerce, to transactions. For some reason, when you bring up this concept, they see a significant distinction between money and speech. People are reluctant to consider a world in which we can transact as freely as we speak. Certainly not a world in which everyone can transact with absolute freedom, without any interference, without any censorship. This is a really interesting philosophical debate. To me, there is no distinction. In fact, to me, the essence of privacy in your financial transactions and your ability to transact with freedom underpins, just like speech, many of your other freedoms. If you have freedom of expression and freedom of association, but you don't have freedom of finance, if you don't have the freedom to protect your property, how quickly will your freedom of association and freedom of expression go away? How can you have the ability to participate in the political process if your bank account can be seized because you participated in the wrong political process, or went to the wrong protest, or donated to the wrong organization? Political speech and financial speech and speech, really not that different. If I say that in most places, I'm a radical. Right? That's a radical idea. The idea that we should afford the exact same freedoms to speech and to money. The idea that the ability to transact with anyone on the planet is an inherent part of human rights. It is nobody's business who I transact with. There is no crime of transacting. You can create crimes after transacting, but the transacting itself is not the crime. The transacting itself is a means of expression. It's my ability to exert self-determination through the fruits of my labor. A radical idea. This philosophical debate has been going on for many, many years, all around the world. And in fact, nowadays we see this is coming to a significant amount of tension. If you ask the average person, is it okay if the intelligence agencies monitor your phone calls, monitor your emails, watch you through your webcam? Most people would say, no, that's not okay. That's not an acceptable state of society. How many people have noticed that every single credit card transaction you do, every line on your bank statement, is not only monitored, but is freely given to all intelligence agencies without warrants, without suspicion, without probable cause, without due process? Are we outraged about this? Most people aren't. Most people are outraged that the NSA may monitor the metadata of their phone calls, but they don't give a damn that under the Patriot Act, every financial transaction they ever do can be picked up by a podunk sheriff in a tiny county to peruse at their discretion without any form of legal process for everyone and anyone at all times. We make these artificial distinctions between these fundamental rights. To me, there is no distinction. The privacy of my finances is as important as the privacy of me. My ability to express myself in commerce in a society is equivalent to my ability to express my opinion. And if I don't have freedom in my financial transactions, I don't have freedom at all. Or I have freedom that is subject to immediate withdrawal if I cross a line I can't see. That is a scary state of affairs. Most people accept it. So this is an interesting philosophical discussion. We can go one way, we can go the other, we can talk about it. None of it matters. None of it matters. And the reason none of it matters is because that is the discussion we were having for the previous 2 decades. That is the discussion society has had for a long time. That is not the discussion we're going to have from now on. None of that matters. Because the statement, money is speech, is no longer a philosophical question for debate. It is a technological fact. And that's Bitcoin. And that's Ethereum. And that's open, public, borderless, transparent, transnational, neutral, censorship-resistant blockchains. They establish, in reality, the technological fact that money is speech. Why? Because money can now be communicated over the networks of speech. It can be transported with the protocols of speech. It can be encapsulated into the media of speech and expression. It is a system of expression. Money is a content type on the internet. .avi, .mp3, .bitcoin. It is a content type. A Bitcoin transaction requires no reference to an external authority. It requires nothing but the inherent signatures in the transaction and the proof of work that can be presented in a block to stand alone. It is self-verifiable. You can look at proof of work, which is just a number. You can look at it and say, in order to create this number, this much energy was consumed. That is a fact. And I don't need to ask anyone to make that calculation. I can evaluate the truth of that statement independently without reference to any external authority. Bitcoin transactions, money, commerce now, stands on its own as an expression of value. I have said in many of my talks, money is a language. Money is the language by which we express value to each other. Maybe you thought that was a fanciful statement of philosophy. What I'm telling you is that it is a statement of technological fact. And what that does is it immediately creates a completely inverse relationship with authority. If I wanted to transact commercially when the question of money as speech was a philosophical debate, I had to assert the truth of that and fight for that right. Now, the technological fact that money is speech allows me to use the medium of speech and all of its privacy enhancements, Tor, anonymizers, remixers, encryption, to speak freely through money on the internet. And better yet, the only way to change that is to censor speech. Because you can't differentiate my commercial speech, my money speech, from my political speech, from my cat videos, from my gossip. It's all completely the same on the internet. It uses the same technology infrastructure. It uses the same protocols. It uses the same privacy protections. And it mixes with everything else that's out there to form one giant roar of human expression. And in that roar, my money is speech. It has been established as a technological fact that I need no one persuade or debate. I can simply speak commercially. I can transact. I have established my freedom of expression in the domain of commerce, my sovereignty of speech, now that this is a technological fact. Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that talk. It's the first time I've talked on that specific topic. As always with these events, I would like to invite you all for Q&A, and hopefully we can have a nice conversation about this or any other topic you want to talk about. Let's get a microphone to you, and I'll take your questions.
So first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I think if you look at...
Hold it a bit closer.
Can you hear me like that?
Yes.
Okay. So if you look at what you just said, I think the freedom of transaction is hierarchically higher than the one of speech. And just because you have in a transaction, if you send a money transaction, it's a one-to-one relationship. If you speak, you can reach many people. So yes, probably you have more responsibility. So I would go even further and say the freedom of economic transaction must come first, because you can have good reasons to censor certain type of speech. But you shouldn't censor economic transaction because it's really concerning you and the other party you want to transact with.
That's a really great point. I don't know if you've heard that. The idea that in speech, when you're speaking to many, you have a higher maybe burden of responsibility. In a transaction between you and another person, it is entirely between two private individuals. What is really the authority of anyone to intervene in that transaction? Yes, I can agree with you there. I don't really see any situations under which you would restrict speech anyway, but that's because I'm a radical.
To me, it could appear that you're conflating...
A bit closer to your...
To me, it could appear that you're conflating the fact that your different transactions are carried across the same network as your speech in order to construct the idea that sending money or Bitcoin is speech. I mean, I could apply deep packet inspection and put that out.
You can apply what?
Deep packet inspection.
Yes.
And basically figure out, separate all of your money transactions from your...
Yeah, it just doesn't work that well. I mean, we've seen people try to apply deep packet inspection to a number of scenarios, but with the ability to do encryption, the ability to do onion routing, the ability to do many other privacy protecting things, I can take all of those privacy protecting things and now apply them to my commercial transactions just as much as I apply them to my speech. You can't easily differentiate, and if you can, that's an attack on the network and will make it harder.
I mean, from a legal standpoint, the fact that you carry your transactions across the same medium as your speech doesn't make it speech.
I don't care about the legal perspective. I care about de facto outcomes. Technology is about creating de facto truth that the law has to catch up to. And that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin.
I have a question for you, Andreas, and you.
Yes.
Some governments are studying the possibility to issue national cryptocurrencies.
Yes.
And so what would be your thought with respect to what you said? And as a corollary question, when we think about the national information on a blockchain, government will say it should be in the territory, it should be on a national blockchain. And a national blockchain is in total contradiction with distributed ledger principles. So what are your thoughts about that?
So one of the magical things about freedom of speech is that freedom of speech is not freedom to force anyone to listen. And when you speak, sometimes what you say is boring or idiotic and then nobody listens. You don't get a guarantee of an audience, you only get the right to say something. If national governments want to create their own national blockchains, they are engaging in boring speech. That form of system that ignores the realities of a borderless, open alternative that exists is by definition crippled. It is limited in its abilities. If you take this technology and you try to wrap it in restrictions and control it, you have something that is not open, not borderless, not open access, not open innovation, not neutral, not censorship resistant. What is it? It's business as usual, only binary. We already have digital money like that. In fact, 92% of all money in circulation is money in somebody else's database. If that database is built by the government, it doesn't change the fundamental fact. So I would consider that free speech, but boring. You can't impose geographical restrictions on these things, or if you do, you cripple them. And so it is an oxymoron, I would guess.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's an abundance of free speech, of boring free speech.
Sure there is.
But there isn't an abundance of Bitcoin and distribution. So I want to get back to the privacy argument.
Yes.
How do we get the privacy if it's really difficult to get Bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies without money?
Well, so I don't get Bitcoins with money. I work for them. I get Bitcoins through the expenditure of my labor. I don't buy, I earn Bitcoins. And there's a fundamental philosophical difference when you start earning Bitcoin or any currency in the new digital domain compared to when you buy it. When you buy it, it's an investment. When you earn it, it's the fruit of your labor. When I buy Bitcoin, I'm simply adding my economic activity to Bitcoin. When I take my labor and I start selling my labor for Bitcoin, I'm doing two things. I'm not only adding my productivity to Bitcoin, I'm also removing it from the US dollar. I'm removing it from the traditional sphere of economics. That is a very powerful act. And I would encourage you all, don't buy Bitcoin, earn it. Whatever you do it for Bitcoin. You cut hair for Bitcoin. You drive a taxi for Bitcoin. Nobody will buy your services. Nobody bought my services for 2 years. That's okay, eventually someone will. And then you're part of this new vibrant economy. Give it time. These things have momentum. Momentum is increasing. And at some point, you'll be the one who made the smart decision 5 years ahead of everybody else.
Thank you.
Hi, a question concerning speech and currency. You cannot acquire anything with speech alone, but you can. So your comparison is not 100% the same. I mean,
Sorry, I can't acquire anything through speech alone?
no, you can't.
Oh, standing on the stage right now, I acquire most of my requirements out of life, out of doing exactly what I'm doing now, which is speech. So I don't see how that's not... Okay, how many people would buy me a drink tonight? I just acquired a whole bunch of drinks.
Yeah, but it's still not the same.
It's not the same. It's a philosophical argument.
Yeah, sure, but I mean...
But the point is...
freedom, and you want to put them, if you want to put them equivalently,
Yes.
You just have to look at the consequences, which doesn't mean I'm opposed of your value system, but just say it's not exactly the same.
Yes, I think the consequences of spreading ideas are much, much more powerful than the consequences of spreading money. And I think for far too long we've undermined one in favor of the other. I don't believe in controlling the spending of money, because then you give the power to those who are controlling it to spend the money any way they want, and you only restrict it for everybody else. And that ends in a society that is very, very imbalanced. We see that already. If you have a banking license and you conduct money laundering, nothing happens to you, right? Nothing at all. We see that happening again and again in society. So I don't buy that argument, I'm sorry. I think speech is more powerful than expression through money, and yet money is the one that's restricted. Do you have a microphone?
Yeah,
Yes, there you go.
More or less was the same question. That my idea was that a transaction possibly can more easily influence people to do something.
Right.
Or money could more easily do that than speech. But now as
Yeah, honestly, money is a minor religion. And honestly, forms of speech that promote major religions, capitalism, Catholicism, collaborative things, you know, those are far more powerful than the minor religion of money. It's a cultural construct. Money isn't real. It's only real if you believe in it, and it's no different from any other cultural construct. We make these artificial separations between these, but now we're seeing for a technological fact that they are the same. Does anybody else have a mic?
Yeah,
Yep, here.
just a quick one. Andreas, can you imagine how and why Bitcoin fails to succeed? Just to speculate, how and why Bitcoin fails to succeed?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can imagine a whole bunch of scenario that can result in failure for Bitcoin as it exists today. Now the question is what happens when it fails, how it fails. Does it fail catastrophically? Does it fail temporarily? If it fails temporarily, we fix that, and then it gets stronger. If it fails catastrophically, who here who has been involved in Bitcoin now believes that decentralized global currency is a possibility in this world? And who's buying the new Bitcoin the week it comes out to be an early adopter, right? So if Bitcoin collapsed catastrophically, we will learn what killed Bitcoin, and we will build another decentralized currency if there aren't already dozens of others waiting in the wings, or if the problem affects all of them. The point is to separate the current instance of Bitcoin from the broader implementation of Bitcoin across many years, from the even broader idea of a global, open, borderless, decentralized system of trade and trust. And that last one wins. There's no question about that. The question is, what will we call it and what will it look like? And that, I don't know. Question back there?
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
It's an honor to finally see you.
Thanks for coming.
Quick question, can you give us your thoughts on Zcash, which will launch tomorrow?
I have to say I'm not an expert. I have downloaded and ran the testnet version of Zcash, and I did some test transactions just to see how it works, looked through the source code a bit, and I've read the implementation of ZK snarks. I understood probably about 30% of it. That's generous, right? Yeah, okay, maybe less. And I find it fascinating. I do also understand that from a scaling perspective, it has some challenges that are significantly bigger than the scaling challenges of, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum or other systems. But I also understand that it works very well collaboratively with many other chains. So I would love to see Zcash as a sidechain. I would love to see it as part of the ecosystem. One of the interesting things that's happening now is as you have an ecosystem of blockchains developing, you can borrow features from each of them, or you can use their features temporarily. You can take your money, move it into Zcash, get a degree of anonymity and privacy that is very high, and then move it out into something else and run a smart contract in Ethereum, and then move it to Bitcoin and put it in cold storage for long-term value. It's all part of the ecosystem, and we all benefit from these inventions. So I'm excited to see how it goes. I hope it goes well. Over here? Yes.
Hi.
Oh, one second. Sorry, back there. We'll come back to you in a second. Oh, microphone not working.
Does this work? Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much, Andreas, Thank you for discussing your ideas on freedom of speech. I just had a question regarding zero-knowledge proofs and what you think that means for Bitcoin's scalability. Thank you.
Zero-knowledge proofs for Bitcoin scalability. Scalability and privacy generally tend to be at a design trade-off. So, from what I've seen so far, and I'm certainly not an expert in cryptography, although I do think there are quite a few in the room. From what I understand, things like zero-knowledge proofs are actually fairly heavyweight in terms of the amount of data they need to transmit to achieve a zero-knowledge proof. And so, generally speaking, a lot of the solutions we see in anonymity and privacy require much more data to be transmitted, and that has a negative impact on scalability. So optimizing simultaneously on both scalability and anonymity is difficult. That's all I have. Does that help? All right, over here.
So if I could chip in on this for a second.
Oh yes, please.
So, recently I read a lot about Tumblebit and Nimblewimble.
Yes.
In those two cases, it's it's kind of a result of privacy that you have better scalability because you remove data from the chain that everyone can see.
That is true actually. Nimblewimble actually delivers privacy and anonymity at a much better scale than Bitcoin. It does so at the cost of computational complexity and flexibility. So if you think of Bitcoin is here and Ethereum is much more flexible over here, well, Nimblewimble is in the opposite direction. All you can do is elliptic curve points. You can't even do basic Bitcoin scripting. So there's a trade-off. It's just a trade-off on a different axis. I think the same applies to Tumblebit, but I'm not sure. I'd like to see. Thank you for that.
Hi.
Yes.
Good work. Yeah, now it works. My question would be, Andreas, what are your thoughts on Ethereum hard fork? Because on the one side, you say you have a decentralized currency, cryptocurrency, but on the other hand, if you have, say, very few miners who control large pools, then it's not decentralized at all. It's actually much more centralized if it's a global currency than even some governments. What are your thoughts on that, on the hard fork especially?
Well, let me start backwards from the decentralization question. I think it's important to understand that decentralization is not a Boolean. It's not a true-false value. It's a range. And in fact, it's an asymmetric range, which means that a centralized system has to have almost complete control, end-to-end, in order to be effective at centralizing. If you get a bit of decentralization, it already undermines that quite significantly. So it's an asymmetric scale, which means even a bit of decentralization changes the behavior of a system quite dramatically. A bit of centralization doesn't do anything. A bit of decentralization does quite a lot. So saying it's not decentralized, it is decentralized. It's not as decentralized as it could be. And again, I think it's important to give these systems the benefit of the doubt. And I think it's fair to give Ethereum a honeymoon period. Like, Bitcoin had until 2012, we had no governance problems, no scalability problems. Everybody loved everybody in the community. Zero fees, smooth sailing, right? That was a good 3 years of relatively little drama. And then things got complicated. I think it's important to accept that things will be complicated. And right now for Ethereum, you've got a situation where in order for the protocol to mature, it has to go through stress testing, right? And because it's a system that offers more flexibility, that also implies more complexity, which means more stress testing. And so we've seen more hard forks.
So you're pro hard fork?
No, I'm not pro hard fork. It depends on the motivations, it depends on the context, it depends on the risks that are taken in order to do that. There's a big difference in trying to do, for example, a contentious hard fork on a $10 billion currency for a temporary solution to scalability versus doing a hard fork to address a serious imbalance in gas in a very early stage system that doesn't yet have very heavy production use and therefore has some flexibility to adjust. That's a completely different context. And so I won't give you a clean black and white answer because none of these questions involve black and white answers. They're all about nuance and context.
After the DAO, were you for or against the hard fork?
Briefly, okay, so right after the hard fork for the DAO, which I said would create a terrible precedent and was maybe the worst solution or maybe the least worst solution, and I couldn't tell which. For the first 2 weeks after the fork, I went, oh, look, they succeeded very well from a technical perspective. It pulled off great. And then afterwards, I revised my opinion. And I said, okay, great, they succeeded technologically, but politically it ended up damaging the ecosystem. And I think one of the problems with having multiple forks is that it creates confusion and fragmentation for developers. One of the advantages is that it allows you to experiment with different approaches to governance, different approaches to scaling, et cetera, et cetera. So again, different recipes for different solutions.
Thank you, straight answer.
That was not a straight answer. Hello.
Yeah, my question is a little maybe naive at this point, but when we talk of currency, we talk of fiat currency, we trust in an entity. In the case of the US dollar, might be the Federal Reserve, or as long as the sovereign exists. What is underpinning the trust in Bitcoin? Trust in what?
Okay, that's a great question. It's a question that comes up a lot. And this, at its core, is the fundamental question of where does money get its value, right? And quite honestly, I would challenge the idea that when you trust a currency, what you're trusting is an entity. I don't think that most people who spend Swiss francs do so because they trust that the Swiss central bank is going to offer good stewardship in managing the currency within a 2 to 2.5% inflation per annum band, while simultaneously managing unemployment in a grand strategy of monetary policy. Most people have no idea what the Swiss central bank is. They probably think there's gold in the vaults. They have no idea how money works. What they trust is that if they go to the store tomorrow, someone will give them a dozen eggs for, what is it, 40 francs here? 400 francs? Something like that. That is where the value comes from. It's forward trust. It's the anticipation of future value, expecting not only that you believe in the illusion that pieces of plastic or paper have value, but the next person tomorrow will still believe in that illusion long enough to feed you. That's where the value of the money comes from, not some central entity. What the central entity does, fundamentally, is they provide a guarantee that the money hasn't been forged, which was especially important when the money was precious metal, and you wanted to know that it wasn't 30% zinc, but actual silver or actual gold. And so the monarch would stamp it to tell you, this is guaranteed. And in fact, it was one of the highest crimes of treason was to forge, tamper with, or slice off pieces of the money. The monarch provided a guarantee of unforgeability, a guarantee of metal purity, when the value was intrinsic in the coin, or somewhat intrinsic in the coin. What exactly does the central bank offer in terms of that? Because it certainly isn't a promise not to print more, right? It is, again, a promise of unforgeability. And what it says is, within this jurisdiction, you will be able to use this, at least, if nothing else, to the buyer of last resort, which is you will be able to pay the government for any money you owe the government with this money. That is the only guarantee you get, the only base of trust you get. And I would say that's relatively weak. So why do people trust in Bitcoin? Why do people trust in any of the digital currencies that exist out there? Fundamentally, because they believe that it will still have value tomorrow and they can use it to buy goods and services. That's how I use it. I get paid in Bitcoin, and then I use Bitcoin to live. And I trust that I will still be able to use Bitcoin tomorrow to live, and as long as that joint hallucination rolls forward, we have value. So the value is really in the community. It's in the economic activity of all of the participants, in the understanding that we are all using this to trade. And the second part is that I trust it can be forged, because I've read the algorithms and I know it can be forged. It can be faked, right? And it can be diluted. So I have that level of trust. That's all it is. I believe that other people will find it useful in the future. And that's the basis for all money. Now, behind that, a very large amount of energy expenditure and computation for Bitcoin that ensures that it is also rare. Does that help answer the question?
Hi. Hi.
Oh, there you are.
Hey. I have a question about politics.
A question about politics.
Yeah,
I don't really do politics. I'm kind of mild.
Where you come from, in this talk, for example, was essentially political speech.
Yes.
Money is an attribute of power. It's always been, for good and bad reasons, probably.
Yes.
My question is also, we see with all this drama you're talking about, the folks,
yes,
that we're creating a new kind of politics, right? Some people have more knowledge, some people have more access, some people have more control of the system, and you still need to protect the little guys, the newbies, people who don't understand anything to code. And I don't see that moving forward as fast as the technical side of things.
Yeah.
How do you think, because I think it's going to be crucial. We're going to be linked by money more than we have been ever. And it's going to be useful to solve things like, global climate things and stuff like that. We need that model of governance. So, where does that come from? And where do you see it emerging?
Governance is a lot harder to do than the basics of transaction, trust verification that we do in Bitcoin. It's a lot harder to do because human nature, emotions, and other things intervene. I actually kind of prefer this kind of politics where the people who are engaging in all of this can't confiscate my money and can't actually do much at all. What we've seen in Bitcoin for the last year and a half is political impotence from all sides. Like, nobody can say, this is the way debates usually work in the political world is that after an hour of debate, someone stands up and says, thank you all, I appreciate hearing all these opinions, now let me tell you, this is what we're going to do. And nobody in Bitcoin can actually do that. So as a result, the meeting just goes on forever. And what it's demonstrated is that no one has the power to say, I've had enough of this, you're going to do it my way. That doesn't work in Bitcoin. And that creates paralysis. But what it also creates, in my opinion, is security. I'm protected from fickle decisions by people I did not elect that can affect my money. Because what happens in Bitcoin when there's paralysis of decision is the status quo remains. And that's not a bad model for governance, at least for now. So I'm not too worried about that. I think the drama can be toxic to the community. I also think that not all of it is naturally occurring, if you know what I mean. There are entities out there that are fertilizing this drama. It's happened to every other community, in every other field in the history of humanity. It would be naive to think that you don't have some drama being fertilized in Bitcoin on purpose. Who's an agent in here? You? 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 No? Okay. Come tell me later. Oh, you are an agent. No? Oh, no, you want to ask a question. Okay, so governance is something that we're going to see develop. One of the things to realize is that the governance involves complex multilateral relationships. And when you look at systems as they scale and develop, the first things you get are things that work with one person. Then gradually, as the system evolves, you can start doing bilateral things, which involve two parties. And then once you have enough people, you start doing multilateral things that involve multiple parties. That's why Facebook didn't happen in 1992, when no one had fixed internet or barely any email. The first applications have to be simplistic. Complexity emerges once you've stabilized the basics. And governance is complex. So that's to say, I don't think it's impossible. I don't think we can't find ways to use this technology to improve governance. I think we will, but not yet. So for now, we have to ignore the drama and focus on the technology and build things. Yes, agent. No. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Continuing from the question about the confidence that we have in something like Bitcoin,
yes,
which gives it its currency, its viability. Do you think, and I guess I'm going to ask you a prediction here, when do you think governments will consider seriously cryptocurrencies as a potential alternative? Would it be when there's economic crisis and a run on the bank and they're looking for a refuge? Is it a refuge solution for banks? What do you think will require the adoption of the efficiencies of work, just even the efficiencies of cryptocurrencies by government?
So first of all, I think it's a very dangerous idea to have national governments adopt any form of digital currency, especially one that they don't control, or a global digital currency, and then impose that on the citizenry as their only choice. And, the fundamental model of having national currencies that are a monopolistic system that is imposed on you, that you don't have a choice, is part of the problem we have in the world. So I'm looking to a post-national world. I don't think Bitcoin should replace national currencies. I think you should have a choice to use anything and Bitcoin and anything else. However, I do predict that some governments will do that. I believe, and forgive my geography if I get this wrong, I believe that Montenegro uses euros, even though they're not part of the economic area, and they're not part of any of the European Union treaties. And the reason they do that is because they realize that the cost of maintaining a central bank, printing facilities, and printing currency is damn expensive, especially if you want it to not be forged. And so Montenegro is not the only country that has decided to simply adopt by proxy another unit's currency to save on the administrative costs of running their own, right? Outsourcing, basically. I wouldn't be surprised that you will see in some nation states, if they have a collapse of their national currency and they can't afford to print money, and yet these digital currencies are in broad circulation, they're broadly available, they're part of mainstream use, they just say, you know what, we don't need a currency anymore. People can just use this and back out of the business of currency. Now, that's probably going to be a very small country. It's going to be a country that can't easily impose its sovereignty, that can't afford to be all fancy with its money. Or it may be a failed state. I think those are the conditions under which you see it. I don't think the United States is going to say, hey, let's all switch to Bitcoin. We didn't even switch to metric. We tried twice.
I just wanted to add a statement to your answer you gave to the gentleman in the back regarding the value.
Yes, thank you.
There's a for value, but when I get confronted with questions about Bitcoin, I often hear, so there's intrinsic value, because in fact, it's true what you say. A lot of people think that I can go to the national bank and give me 10 francs and they give me some amount of gold.
Silver or gold, yes.
I think it's kind of
Hold it a bit closer to your mouth so it can hear you.
Okay, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Perfect.
So I just wanted to add that for me it's intriguing and also ironic that for me the intrinsic value in Bitcoin lays in its non-physicalness, exactly in those mathematical properties which make it non-physical.
Rather than intrinsic value, I like to use the term intrinsic utility. Because the truth is that systems of money that have intrinsic value make for not very good money. Because the intrinsic value of the money dilutes the purpose. Money is meant to be an abstraction of value by which you communicate value, not value itself. If you can eat the money, then some people will choose to eat the money, causing a deflationary situation because there's a reduction in the supply of money because people ate it, right? So if you chose bananas as your money, that doesn't make a very good system of money. Things that have intrinsic value, their intrinsic value may change abruptly due to circumstances. If you use water as your money and you have a monsoon, your money supply went to shit. If you have a drought, suddenly your money supply is much more different than it was before. So the best forms of money don't have intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is an illusion that we've created in order to better explain money at a level of a 5-year-old, which is the same level we explain it to everyone in our society forever. And instead, I think intrinsic utility is a great concept. That Bitcoin is useful, and it has uses that can't be done by other things, and that intrinsic utility isn't forward-looking, it's practical. So thank you for adding that. All right.
2 more questions.
2 more, and then we're done?
Is it okay? How long do you...
I'm having fun. All right. Let's see. If people have more, we'll go a bit longer. Who has the microphone? Yes. Sorry, I can't see you. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for the talk.
Closer to your mouth, please.
Thanks for the talk. From a perspective of defending and decreasing freedom, should we even care about politics? Why and why not? Or should we just focus on counter-economics like we do, we only live by Bitcoin, etc.? What do you think? Why politics could matter, why not?
So I think so the question was, should we care about politics or should we focus on doing these things? To paraphrase, on building things. That is politics. What I'm doing here is politics. Politics is a conversation about how we best want to organize society. It's not a conversation that you can only have if you're an elected official. It's not a conversation that you can only participate in once every 4 years. It's not a conversation that you can only participate in by wearing a blue-colored or red-colored pin. That's what they want us to think politics is. They want us to think politics is the dirty business of deciding between 2 terrible choices once every 4 years, so they can mess up the life of our neighbor who we didn't like anyway and supported the wrong candidate. That's not politics. That's tribalism played out in governance. And we don't need that. Politics is us as a society having a conversation about governance, and we're doing that right here. We didn't cast any votes. I certainly wasn't elected. The bottom line is that this is politics. We are engaging it every day. And in fact, local organization, creating community, creating things that are valuable to other people, helping each other is the most powerful form of politics we have. Don't vote. Code. Okay, one more.
Wait a second.
Right over here.
It's over there.
I have
over here?
Yeah, a question.
Sorry.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts and opinion about Steemit from a technical perspective, but also in general?
Yes. I was doing a presentation in Prague 3 or 4 weeks ago, and someone asked me, what do you think about Steam? And I heard, what do you think about Steve? And so I'm standing on stage, and I'm running through my mind furiously. Who do I know in this space called Steve? And what can I say about Steve that will be appropriate for an audience question? So, Steemit. Thank you for pronouncing it better. I haven't participated, and I've been asked by a lot of people to participate, and most of the people who've asked me to participate have done so by saying that I could make a lot of money by posting something. And to me, that makes me much more skeptical of the long-term value of something like this. I do believe in the enormous power of money to mediate social relationships. Why? Because money has been mediating social relationships for thousands of years, and therefore, why not also use it to mediate social relationships on the internet? However, as I was saying earlier, the complexity of the system matters. At the moment, we're doing like the prokaryote, the single-cell eukaryotes of Bitcoin, right? The level of complexity is pond scum, right? We're not going to start making the complex animal kingdom of cryptocurrencies yet. From a biological perspective, we're still in the pond scum age. It's important to realize that there are limits to what you can do when the vast majority of people around you don't use something. At the moment, the penetration of these technologies is extremely limited. So, one of the things that I think it's important to look at is how social media emerged on the internet. It's very interesting. When Facebook launched, they didn't launch worldwide. They didn't launch stateswide. They didn't even launch statewide. They launched building-wide. They went to one building, the Stanford campus, and they annoyed the hell out of every person in that building until they all signed up for the Facebook. And then it was useful, because at least you knew that everybody else in your building had it. And then they did the second building, and then the third, and after a year of this, they got a campus, and it spread from there. It's very difficult to bootstrap bilateral markets. It's much, much harder to bootstrap multi-party markets, and even harder to bootstrap these kinds of immersive, mesh-like experiences that involve broad participation. So, I have a feeling that these things won't work for a few years. Maybe they will, but I'm skeptical. We'll see. I would like to see them work. One of the difficult things with any emerging technology is that the most important thing is not the team, it's not the funding, it's not the idea, and it's not the execution, it's timing. You can have the most brilliant idea ever, and you're just too early. Google was the 22nd search engine launched. Amazon was the 30th attempt at doing home delivery over the internet. And we don't remember the other 29. So we'll see. I wish them luck.
Hello. Yeah.
There you are.
Yes. It's more getting back to the beginning, to the more philosophical question.
Yes,
question.
Sure.
So, you said that there is an equivalence between money and speech. And what I will argue is that do you think that money, like money transaction, could have like negative externality that are not really visible? For example, like when you engage in some criminal activities. And getting back to the technological topic is that if you have a perfect privacy system, which is what we want in a sense,
yes,
how the world will look like.
So money has externalities, but so does any social interaction. Speech has influence, and money is just a form of influence. And speech has power, and money is a form of power. If you pay someone to do a criminal activity, what they're going to do is they're going to take your money, and then they're going to talk about it with their co-conspirators and use speech to organize the rest of their criminal activity. And they might even actually use that money to speak further to engage other people in engaging in criminal activity. We make distinctions between actions and words. And to me, money is a form of speech. It's not a crime in itself. The crime happens, maybe, afterwards. If you enable systems of complete privacy, complete anonymity, complete independence, then criminals will use them. If you don't, then criminals will use them too. The difference is the rest of us can't. That's the only difference. There exist today systems that will allow you to do all of these things with very robust anonymity. And criminals are already using those systems. I don't get to not allow criminals to use technology. I only get to ask the question, should we allow everybody else to also? If you make a law that says you can't use something, here's a newsflash, criminals will break that law. Because they're criminals. And they're probably going to break a much bigger law than that law, right? what you're doing is you're ensuring that the innocent can't use the technology that the criminals are already using. And to me, that's the essence of also of freedom of speech. If you have someone who opens their mouth and screams profanities at the poor lady waiting at the bus stop who didn't want to hear all of those words, that's not a good outcome. But if you try to shut that person up, two things will happen. One, they'll still speak, right? They'll be screaming profanities in their jail cell, at the very least, but you're going to stop everybody else from speaking just to protect yourself from that. And I think that's a bad idea. Now, turns out I'm a radical, so we'll see. All right, one more question?
Yes.
Two more questions, 1 second, yes.
It buys into what we just talked about here.
Yes.
This stuff. You know, my youngest brother, he's a professor in law. He teaches his students to read the word of the law and write the word of the law, but just according to the spirit of the law.
Yes.
Now, when we look at these new technologies like distributed ledgers, Ethereum, smart contracts, etc., suddenly we stand in a dilemma, I think, where you have to decide who is actually judging the spirit of a piece of code.
Uh-huh.
So if you look at that from that perspective, my question goes in the direction that is a maybe national, maybe regional, maybe global legal framework necessary, preemptively even, and if so, how urgent is that?
As a system that overrides the consensus algorithm, no. Not only is it not necessary, it is odious. It is contrary to the very concept we're trying to build. We already have plenty of institutions that allow you the flexibility to try to see if your problem will be adjudicated based on the spirit of law in front of an impartial judge or a jury of your peers. We already have all of that. Everything we have is all of that. And your friends' students will leave law school believing in the spirit of law and be gradually ground down through the system of prosecution and courts until eventually they don't believe in anything other than winning the case. That's usually what happens. But the reason we have a consensus algorithm is because we're trying to build an alternative system where the outcome is known based on the formulation of the contract, and it is completely neutral and impartial. Will that always work? Hell no, it won't. Sometimes it will backfire badly, and we will have a disaster.
That's what I mean.
But then the question is, how can law create a safety net? The worst case you can have, if you have a system where the smart contract has failed, is that every participant in the smart contract finds anyone they can specifically identify jurisdictionally, geographically, individually, and sue them in whichever court they choose or find themselves at the time. And then you have to deal with this morass. I'm not suggesting that's a good outcome. I'm suggesting it's an inevitable outcome, that if you have disputes that arise in this system and you don't have a means of resolving them other than the consensus mechanism, people will start filing lawsuits at each other. So, there's this really interesting framework called the New York Convention on Arbitration, which is an international treaty that allows you in 156 countries to claim independent legal arbitration through a private system of law that you can predefine. Predefine the duration, the discovery, who the judges are going to be, how it's going to be adjudicated. Perhaps we should be building systems that say, if there is a failure in this consensus system, our disputes will be, we agree to waive our rights under the New York Convention to local courts and instead subject ourselves to arbitration under a crowd jury selected by smart contract 0xABCDEF to provide the final solution. Maybe you do that. I don't know if it's a good solution. I know it's better than trying to defend yourself in 100 local courts.
But what if it's not in the consensus algorithm, but in the use, or rather abuse of the system? Like, for example, the DAO groups, as I call it, but I can imagine much worse.
So the trick is distinguishing between what is use and what is abuse of the system. And in a system that has no spirit of law, but only has rule of consensus, there is no such thing as a distinction between use and abuse of the system. If you can use the system, it is use of the system. If the consensus algorithm allowed it, it is use. The distinction you're putting, which is a normative judgment of the spirit, doesn't apply. It simply doesn't. So, quite honestly, I think the Tao was a great lesson in that. And the lesson wasn't, should we fork or should we not fork? The lesson is, don't put $150 million fucking dollars in an untested contract, you idiots. But that's a lesson that is self-correcting, right? People got hurt by that, and they're going to learn, and we're going to get better. We have to realize that what we're building here, these systems, their defining characteristic is caveat emptor. They are free market systems. They are free collaborative, voluntary participation systems. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. That is not a warning. That is a fact. And so you take it as it is. And if you don't like it, you can use the other systems. We have plenty of them. But we're not going to change this one and make it into one of the others. In fact, we're going to fiercely resist that change. Does that help? All right.